There's a terrible logic that the mind builds when money is tight. It goes like this. If God cared, things would be different by now. If faith worked, the numbers would add up. If obedience mattered, the pressure would have lifted already. This logic feels true because it feels fair. But what if the entire framework is backwards? What if the very moment when everything seems to be collapsing inward is the exact moment God begins rewriting the story? This is not a comfortable thought. It resists the instinct to find relief, to get answers, to make the pain stop. But sit with it for just a moment. How many times has someone done everything right and still watched the money drain away? How many prayers have been prayed with complete sincerity, only to be followed by more bills, more silence, more strain? And here is the question that no one wants to ask out loud. What if that pressure is not punishment? What if it is preparation? The people who miss their financial breakthrough do not miss it because they lack faith. They miss it because they misread the season. They stand in the doorway of transformation and mistake it for a dead end. They experience the discomfort of transition and call it abandonment, and so they turn back, right before the turn was coming. There are patterns that appear before God shifts a financial story, not vague feelings, not religious cliches, actual, measurable, repeatable patterns that show up in Scripture, in testimonies, and in the hidden months before a breakthrough. 7 of them, to be exact. And most people experience at least 4 or 5 of them without ever recognizing what is happening. They think they are in a valley. They are actually in a hallway. So if there is restlessness right now, if there is confusion about why things are not moving, if there is a strange sense that something is happening beneath the surface but nothing can be named yet, stay here. Because what feels like delay might be the most important transition of an entire life. The first sign is one that most people misinterpret completely. Here is what no one tells you about alignment with God. It does not feel like peace at first. It feels like war. The pressure increases the moment the decision is made. The moment someone decides to take God seriously with their finances, something shifts in the atmosphere. Not in a mystical, untouchable way, in a very real, very measurable way. The expenses increase, the opportunities close, the help that was always there suddenly disappears. And the mind immediately interprets this as a sign that the decision was wrong. But consider what is actually happening. A life that has been quietly drifting does not attract opposition. A person who is comfortable and compromised does not experience resistance. Attacks do not come to empty houses. They come to places where something valuable is being built. When someone begins to move toward God with intention, when they start to organize their life around His principles instead of survival instincts, the enemy of that life does not sit back and watch. He pushes, he sends chaos. He stacks the problems all at once, hoping the pressure will send the person back to where they were. This is why so many people give up right at the edge of breakthrough. The noise gets loud right before the car changes gears. The turbulence increases right before the plane reaches altitude. And the financial pressure intensifies right before God rewrites the story. It is not a sign of being off course. It is often a sign of being exactly on course. So when the bills pile up the same week the commitment to tithing was made, when the client leaves the same month the business was dedicated to God, when the job offer falls through right after the decision to trust Him with the career, do not interpret that as rejection. It might be the clearest sign that something is beginning to shift. The second sign is quieter, but just as powerful. There is a moment that comes quietly, almost unnoticed at first. It is the moment when something inside begins to reject the life of survival. It is the moment when living paycheck to paycheck stops feeling normal and starts feeling wrong. Not wrong in a guilty way, wrong in a visceral identity-level way, like wearing clothes that no longer fit, like sleeping in a room that has become too small. For years, maybe decades, a certain level of financial strain was simply the baseline. Debt was expected, budgets were juggled, bills were paid late but eventually paid, and it all just felt like life. But then something changes. Not externally, internally. The same cycle that used to be tolerable becomes unbearable. The same explanations that used to bring comfort now sound hollow. And there is a deep as growing sense that this is not what life is supposed to be. This is not dissatisfaction. It is awakening. When God is preparing to change a financial story, He does not start by changing the bank account. He starts by changing the appetite. He begins to dismantle the internal tolerance for limitation. He makes slavery feel like slavery again, so that freedom becomes the only acceptable option. This is why some people can have very little and feel content, while others have enough and feel caged. It is not about the amount. It is about the assignment. And when God is shifting someone into a new season of provision, He first shifts their sense of what they were made to carry. The discomfort is not a problem. It is a sign that the soul is being resized for something it was never meant to live without. The third sign is the one that feels the most like betrayal. This is the sign that feels the most like betrayal. Old sources of security begin to crumble. A client who has been loyal for years suddenly leaves. A job that felt stable suddenly ends. A person who always helped suddenly stops. And the immediate thought is, God, why now? Why would you allow this when things are already hard? But here is what is actually happening. God is removing dependencies before He releases expansion. He is cutting cords that were holding someone in a place they have outgrown. It feels like loss because it is loss, but not all loss is punishment. Some loss is liberation. Think of a child learning to ride a bike. The training wheels have to come off, and when they do, it feels terrifying. The child falls. The knees get scraped. There is crying, frustration, maybe even anger at the parent who removed the wheels. But the parent is not being cruel. The parent knows that true freedom requires temporary instability. The child cannot learn to balance as long as the crutch remains. God does the same thing with finances. He allows certain streams to dry up because they were keeping someone small. He lets certain relationships end because they were preventing growth. He closes doors that felt safe because safety had become a substitute for trust. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it is disorienting. But the question that must be asked is this: if that source had not ended, would there have been any reason to reach for something greater? Most people do not expand by choice. They expand by necessity. And God, in His kindness, sometimes creates the necessity. The fourth sign appears in the details. There is a shift that happens when someone is being prepared for more. God begins to watch the small things. It is subtle, but unmistakable. God begins to pay attention to details that seemed irrelevant before. A $5 coffee. A subscription that auto-renews. A habit of saying yes to small expenses without thinking. These things were never addressed before. But suddenly, there is an internal check. A hesitation. A question that rises up from somewhere deeper than logic. Does this align? This is not legalism. It is not about earning God's favor through perfectionism. It is about capacity. God does not give weight to a structure that cannot hold it. He does not entrust resources to someone who has not yet learned to steward small things with intention. And so, before the breakthrough, there is often a season of refinement, a season where God begins to test not the big decisions, but the thoughtless ones. The reason many people never move into financial breakthrough is not because they lack big faith. It is because they have no structure for small obedience. They pray for tens of thousands but cannot be trusted with $10. They ask God for a business but cannot manage a budget. They want the harvest but resist the discipline of planting in rows. This is why God watches, not to condemn, to prepare. Because the money that is coming will require a completely different level of stewardship than the money that is here now. And if the foundation is not laid in the small things, the big things will do more harm than good. The fifth sign is the strangest of all. This is one of the strangest signs, and one of the most telling. A contrarian impulse toward generosity appears, right in the middle of financial pressure, when logic screams to hold tight, to save every penny, to protect what little there is. Something else begins to rise. A quiet, almost irrational impulse to give, not out of guilt, not out of manipulation, but out of something that feels like obedience, even when it makes no earthly sense. This is the sign that terrifies people the most because it defies every natural instinct. The enemy of faith will call it foolishness. The mind will call it irresponsible. The budget will call it impossible. But the Spirit knows. The Spirit recognizes that this is not about the amount being given. It is about the source being redefined. When someone plants a seed in the middle of winter, they are not planting because the conditions are ideal. They are planting because they believe in the season that is coming. And there is a spiritual authority that comes with seeds planted in hard ground. A weight, a substance, a kind of faith that God does not ignore. This is why the impulse comes during lack, not during abundance. Because God is not asking for the money. He is asking for the trust. He is asking, do you believe me enough to let go when everything in you wants to hold on? And when the answer is yes, when the seed is planted even though the soil looks dead, something shifts. Not always immediately, not always visibly, but shifts. The people who experience the greatest financial turnarounds are almost always the ones who gave when it made no sense. Not because giving is magic, but because giving in the midst of pressure is evidence of a completely reordered belief system. And God meets that kind of faith with provision that rewrites entire trajectories. The sixth sign is a shift in the mind itself. There is a transition that happens in the mind when God is preparing to move. Panic begins to be replaced by clarity. The prayers begin to change, not in volume, in content. The desperate, frantic prayers that sound like, save me, rescue me, fix this now, begin to be replaced by something quieter, something steadier. Teach me, show me, help me see what I am missing. This is not resignation, it is maturity. It is the shift from demanding a miracle to asking for a map. And when that shift happens, something begins to unlock. Ideas start to surface. Strategies begin to form. Connections that were always there suddenly become visible. It is not that God was withholding. It is that the noise of panic was too loud to hear. God does not always send money first. Often, He sends strategy, a thought, a plan, a sudden clarity about what needs to change, what needs to end, what needs to begin. And the people who act on that clarity, even when the bank account has not shifted yet, are the ones who position themselves to receive what God has already set in motion. This is why so many breakthroughs come after a season of confusion. The confusion is not wasted. It is the clearing of the mind, the stripping away of false narratives, the dismantling of old patterns that would sabotage the new provision. And when the mind is finally clear, when the panic has been replaced by focus, the path forward often appears with startling simplicity. One God-given idea can change generations. One moment of clarity can redirect an entire financial future. And the people who are patient enough to wait for that clarity, instead of just begging for relief, are the ones who step into stories that do not make sense on paper, but make perfect sense in the spirit. The seventh and final sign is the most mysterious. This is the final sign, and the most difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it. Peace arrives before the provision. Nothing has changed externally. The bills are still there. The account is still low. The pressure is still real. But internally, something has shifted. There is a peace that has no logical explanation. A knowing that does not depend on evidence. A settled assurance that, somehow, it is going to be okay. This peace is not denial. It is not toxic positivity. It is not pretending that the problem does not exist. It is something else entirely. It is the kind of peace that can only come from God. The peace that passes understanding, as Scripture calls it. The peace that shows up before the answer does, like a receipt before the delivery. When someone feels that peace in the middle of financial chaos, it is one of the clearest signs that heaven has already moved. Not maybe, not hopefully, already. The external has not caught up yet, but the internal knows, and that knowing is not wishful thinking. It is faith made manifest. It is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. This is why some people can walk through absolute financial devastation and still have joy, not because they are naive, not because they are pretending, but because they have access to information that the circumstances do not reflect yet. They know that the story is being rewritten, even if the current chapter still looks dark. And when that peace comes, when it settles into the chest and refuses to leave even when the numbers scream otherwise, that is the moment to stop begging and start preparing. Because what is coming is no longer theoretical. It is already in motion. So look at the progression. Pressure that feels like opposition. A growing intolerance for limitation. The crumbling of old securities. A refining of the small habits. A contrarian impulse to give. A shift from panic to clarity. And finally, a peace that makes no earthly sense. This is not the pattern of someone being abandoned. This is the pattern of someone being positioned. This is what it looks like when God is preparing a person to carry something they have never carried before. It does not feel like a blessing while it is happening. It feels like pressure, loss, confusion, and tension. But when the story is told later, after the breakthrough has come, every single one of these signs will make perfect sense. The problem is that most people are standing in the middle of this pattern right now, and they think they are standing in a pit. They think they are being punished. They think they are forgotten. And so they pray for rescue when what they actually need is endurance. They beg God to take them out when He is actually trying to take them through. This is not about waiting passively. It is about recognizing the season. It is about seeing the signs for what they are. And it is about making the choice to keep moving forward, even when forward feels like walking in place. If you are in the middle of financial pressure right now, and if even 2 or 3 of these signs feel painfully familiar, do not interpret that as evidence of failure. Interpret it as evidence of transition. God does not refine people He has given up on. He does not test people He is not preparing to promote. And He does not put someone through a hallway unless there is a room on the other side. The story is being rewritten, not someday, right now. The chapters that feel like loss are actually setup. The months that feel like delay are actually development. And the pressure that feels unbearable is actually the last thing standing between the old story and the new one. This is not the end. This is not even the middle. This is the moment right before. And the people who can see that, the ones who can recognize the pattern when they are still inside it, are the ones who step into the breakthrough without missing it. So if there is financial strain right now, if there is confusion, if there is pressure that makes no sense, do not run from it. Lean into it, not with resignation, with expectation, because the signs are there. The pattern is forming, and the story that is coming will not look anything like the story that is ending. Stay, watch, trust. The change is already happening.